Continue on unnamed road. Then, in 300 feet, turn off your headlights.
Have you ever wondered how many entities Gabriel and his alternates have replaced? Or alternatively, the Mimic, the Carnus that hunts humans and shifts the whole food chain entirely, can theoretically carve from our population? And those aren't even the worst of the bunch. After massive amounts of theorizing and deep diving, I've compiled my own list of about 15 entities that have no doubt wiped out huge percentages of their respective verses. I'm going to be starting with the lower tolls and eventually climbing to our number one that, spoiler alert, renders humanity extinct. This is the deadliest of analog horror. And if you're a fan of this sort of thing, my channel has plenty of content to look into, but seriously, if it's dark already and you're alone in your room, it might be the best to just wait until tomorrow, unless you just don't like sleeping. Number 15, the Obelisk entity. Total possible death toll 250. Obelisk is an analog horror series by Lizard Men Incorporated, and the main thing people latch onto is that reoccurring, friend figure that keeps showing up across the tapes, especially in episodes like My New Friend, where it's in the closet, In Your Home, where it's just kind of looming around, and The House with No Windows. Now, the important thing to note about this entity's death toll, it reads more like a personal stalker slash a sort of home invader, more than really a global infection. Basically like a sort of thing that ruins your life if it picks you, but for the most part, the vast majority of humanity will never even know this thing exists, as it's not like something that automatically reaches every human at once. And that sort of puts a hard cap on the amount of kills I can give it. Because to be honest, it's only a matter of time before people realize that it's a real pattern, and then their response becomes simple: avoiding the locations where it often shows up, not engaging when you do see it, and treating all sightings like an emergency the same way we do for any other active threat. Not to mention, this creature, who I'm not even sure what its name is, doesn't really have the most information on how to really explain it or amplify its total killing potential, which is a common trait of all the Obelisk entities, but that doesn't mean they aren't incredibly disturbing in their own rights. Regardless though, with the knowledge that we have at the moment, as of the beginning of 2026, I'm going to be keeping this at number 15, as there isn't really enough concrete canon to justify, say, millions of kills in the way that we can do for an Outbreak or reality scaling entities. Number 14, the Painters. Total possible death count, 300. Now, a wise man once said, everybody gangsta till these motherfuckers show up on your CCTV. And with good reason, because you're definitely getting blended up into pipes or stabbed 115 times if you do. Love them or hate them, the Painters are essentially two serial killers being hunted by the police in Louisiana, with dozens if not hundreds of murders tied to their spree. Their fear factor is based off how brutal and personal the kills often are, but the limiter is still the same. They're basically humans. Well, psychopath bastards that almost seem like demons at times, but human nonetheless. Meaning they still need to travel, hide, and not get caught forever. And that almost never holds up long term. Not to mention, canonically, they were eventually killed and or put in prison. But they are crafty as all hell and seem to have a perfect sense of teamwork. Not to mention, they're often so confident with their planning that they almost act like they want to be caught at times, leaving their paintings behind with hints to where the bodies are, but regardless, they manage to remain uncaught for an extremely long time. So in a worst case, where they stay ahead far longer than they should and evade cops, I could probably see about a few hundred deaths before that net closes around them. Number 13, Bond, the Walton Files. Total possible death toll, 2,000. Bond is a problem because he's not just a murderer. He's a murderer that can hide behind a somewhat normal shape. The Walton Files material describes Bond attacking and killing people, including stuffing victims in animatronics, and with that adding to the total number of animatronics that are surrounding it. He seems to use his somewhat supernatural, almost demon nature for extra gruesome violence that's way beyond what an ordinary person could probably do in a fight. And to be honest, this is all seeming very familiar to me. Where have I heard this before? It's right on the tip of my tongue. I don't know, I'll figure it out later. Despite of all of this, he's still mostly a localized predator tied to the setting of a restaurant and the surrounding areas and the same relative pattern. But in a scenario where he was more mobile and could go to more towns and locations, he would definitely be more of a threat and would only really be stopped when people eventually adapted to him and realized that it's not just random missing person cases, but rather one entity. Still, he's not really going to be world ending, but deadly enough to eventually make the news feel useless, as you never really know when he's going to show up. All in all, 2000 is kind of generous because eventually people are going to be able to recognize a giant blue bunny animatronic, and I really don't think it could hide for longer than, say, a few months without meeting some sort of police resistance. So y'all are going to have to give me your opinion on this if 2000 seems realistic or just kind of overkill. Number 12, White Mask. Total possible death toll, 15,000. White Mask is one of those threats that initially feels like a sort of local problem until you realize that it could probably keep spreading and there's not really a limit on where this could end. Like, imagine being that archaeologist in that one situation, wandering into the mountain with a team of miners that really have no clue the severity of the situation, only that they need to get the job done, only to randomly stumble across thousands of years of sacrifices, human and non, to some sort of cosmic entity inside of the mountain. Yeah, with all of that, plus like, you know, the shadow cloaked figure or whatever haunting or stalking them from the woods, I think I'd nope the fuck out too. Now, while technically the wiki describes it as some sort of thought form, which is like those ghost things being manifested by the Semiodyne's like device, I've always seen white faces as more of like a godlike ancient deity that has been around for centuries and thrives on antagonizing and brutally killing people. But I suppose if you really think about it, since these things are manifested, it could have been something that was just religious for a while, and then eventually it was manifested into reality by the thought form machine built inside the mountain. But, you know, that's just a theory. On top of its blunt force abilities, it also seems to have biohazard effects to the surrounding areas, like the effects given to the miners that basically mutated all of them beyond recognition. And there must be some sort of reason why sacrifices keep getting made to it through all those years. But it seems like now that that's not happening anymore, White Mask could easily keep expanding into multiple rural and suburban regions around Mount Greylock, which could easily push the death toll into the thousands as unsuspecting civilians share the same fate as Arnold and the miners, slowly messing with the town and trapping them there till they succumb to its effects. I think Basswood County deserves at least some part on this list because it mixes two things that would scale incredibly well death-wise: fear and literally stealing people's fucking skin. Initially, you might just assume it's just an organized group of serial killers based off like the news outlets, but eventually you'll realize that these killers aren't really human or killing at all. Well, not in the traditional sense, at least. And by that I mean, rather than, you know, just stabbing or ripping them apart like some of the other entities on the list, they seem to parasitically crawl inside their skin and wear them. These humanoids tend to take the form of unknown deformed men, but you can't immediately tell the difference. Then if you take a look at the documented deaths tied to humanoids in the series, it gets even more disturbing, as there are hundreds of people that have been described as being killed and their bodies stolen, along with descriptions of mutilation, like a woman being dismembered with her eyes and teeth removed, so on and so forth, with many more following a similar pattern. This sort of mimicry is very important for estimating how many people would actually be killed, because eventually humans won't be able to tell who's not one of them and who has been infected, and this transfers over to all media sources as well, as we see with the doctor's explanation tapes, who is eventually revealed to be a humanoid. And initially, before these things are even like officially announced to the public, they might be able to imitate it good enough to get invited into buildings, move through towns unnoticed, and that makes things so much worse. As if this spreads beyond one county into major cities, you can get mass paranoia, lashing out in violence, people refusing help, and eventually people killing normal humans just in case. Even if the humanoids aren't really a full extinction threat, the social collapse they cause turns the death toll into something huge over time, and we don't really know where this would stop. Total possible death toll, 1 million. The boiled one is a nightmare because it's basically a media trap, and I feel like not a lot of people talk about the threat of the boiled one being able to go into modern technology. It's described as a cognitohazardous creature where seeing its face basically imprints in your mind, and then if you fall asleep at any point afterwards, you enter a pseudo coma, full of misery and this thing tormenting you from the dark, until eventually you're assumed death from lack of food, water, or just complete mental collapse. The key detail is that it spreads perfectly in our world, because people share clips, people replay things, news stations would show warning footage, reaction channels would freeze frame it. Even if the effect isn't instantly by itself, a mass wave of people dropping into pseudocomas would overwhelm and eventually collapse hospitals, crash infrastructure, and cause a giant secondary death toll. That's how you hit 1 million easily, and there's really nothing that would stop it. Hell, there are videos on YouTube alone that cover the boiled one and get millions of views, and if even half of those people die, then that alone is catastrophic. The Tangy virus. Total possible death toll 5 million. The Tangy virus is described as a rapidly evolving pathogen infecting a certain area in southern Louisiana. Now, while this might not seem like much, that rapidly evolving part is one of the most dangerous factors, as even throughout the series we see it purified by boiling the water, and then later on that doesn't work anymore, and then the media outlets don't properly cover it, and it just ends up being a complete nightmare. Even if it did somehow say regional in just Louisiana, it would be devastating to the entire population there. The virus, for those unaware, is completely water-based, and if it gets into larger water systems and travel routes before anyone knows what they're dealing with, it becomes a rolling disaster. But the disease is just half of it. A portion of humanity is infected, but rather than being immediately killed, they are designated with hiding the virus from the rest of humanity, spreading false news and manufacturing water bottles full of it to send to every grocery store around the US. The reason I'm not instantly calling it the end of humanity is because the series frames it as an outbreak, not a guaranteed planet killer. But I feel like 5 million in the worst case, since it is water, is very believable if it spreads into dense population centers, because at the end of the day, every single living human needs to drink water. The Mandela Catalog wiki directly links the intruder to 3,426 disappearances of various children in the surrounding counties of Mandela. And this becomes serious enough that it leads to a total ban on screens and anything that could allow him into reality, or worse, your home. 6 being able to do that once implies that he could likely do it again, and on a bigger scale, traveling through screens rapidly and invading thousands of homes. Not to mention, while he's doing all this, assisting other alternates and inflicting MAD. I don't know if you guys have all seen Mandela Catalog, but if you have, you're familiar with the whole mother distraught at the sight of her missing infant thing, and that would likely be commonplace with these disappearances, especially since the numbers of MAD claim to be about 99.3% or something in that ballpark are not able to survive it. And we'll go into it more in our more serious alternate section later, but for now, seeing one of the more disturbing of the alternates, I could see it easily hit this number over time. Number 7, harvesters. Total possible death toll 80 million. Harvesters are basically living death zones. The Vitacarnis wiki describes them as plant-like specimens with a main bulb and tendrils that can extend up to 150 meters, injecting venom that cause paralysis and severe bleeding, leading to a quick death. This isn't really an entity that you simply just hunt down. It's basically the ground itself becoming hostile in a way that you almost can't even tell until it's too late. And you end up having hikers, campers, children, basically anyone, even the emergency teams that come to rescue them, who set foot in the forest, dying to fields of these things. And you never really quite know how many there is in one place or time. Even if the militaries do eventually learn how to kill these things, which they seem to do at some point in the series, the early months are definitely going to be a massive slaughter. But the key though with this number is they would have to be more widespread than they are in the verse as of now, spreading globally in every forest around the world rather than just in North America and particularly Canada. That being said, the long-term effect in huge regions simply becoming giant no-go zones that still kill people who ignore the warnings or simply don't understand how horrible of a death they could fall victim to. Number 6, the smile fungus. Possible death toll 200 million. The smile tapes have always been something to me that I could very well see being extremely disturbing in real life. Like, picture walking down the street at night, you're almost home, but then you hear a bunch of people hysterically laughing down an alley or something. And usually this wouldn't raise your guard because it could just be a bunch of people drunk off their ass, but in this case it's something different. as you notice one of them is majorly deformed, almost as if their face has been dead and rotting, but yet both have an immeasurably forced smile on their face, eyes almost bulging out of their skull, and when they see you, they literally can't trip over each other fast enough to run you down and make sure you contract the fungus or die in the process. The smile tapes begins with an emergency message claiming San Diego and Tijuana are under attack by the infected, estimating 8,000 infected and warning people to immediately shelter in place. That spread this fast, it would often be worldwide within months, similar to, say, COVID, with millions of infections. And at that point, the news can't even keep up. Even if it isn't really the perfect extinction virus and possibly has its counters, the chaos that ensues is going to be what kills a lot of people as well. As I mentioned before, some of the other ones, the hospitals will be flooding, the supply trains will be breaking, and at this point, when people can't get what they want, they start to do desperate things. In the worst case scenario, where it does spread worldwide, before anyone can get a sort of containment or a grasp on the situation, it could easily hit 200 million, especially because no one who's contracted it has been known to survive this fungus, and they just sort of burn themselves out until eventually they die and puff out spores to whoever is nearby, unfortunate enough to breathe it in nearby. Our only hope as a species would honestly just be to hide inside of a filtered home until they eventually run out of hosts to spread the virus to, and it just kind of dies out. Number 5, mimics and elder mimics. Total possible death toll, 1 billion. Mimics are where Vita Carnis shifts from just simply dangerous wildlife to even your home not being safe. Mimics, different from harvesters that we discussed earlier, are apex predators that outrank humans on the food chain. They might as well be skinwalkers, but instead of bothering with mimicking people, although they do, look like humans at times, they just stalk you and then break into your home and rip you apart. Wiki describes an adult mimic entering a victim's home, lurking, studying routines, and attacking when a human is asleep, and then consuming. It also describes mimics developing more human-like features if they have a steady supply of humans, which makes them better at blending into society, eventually evolving into elder mimics, becoming extremely durable, even described as nearly immune to bullets, except for key vulnerable areas on the face. Mimics are stronger and smarter than us, and the more of them there are, the more deadly for us as a species it's going to be, especially when they get into cities, and again, trust breaks down. Everyone thinks that sheltering in their home and hiding by themselves will save them because they can't trust any of their neighbors anymore not to be mimics, but this is exactly what they want as they begin to hide inside your furniture and take millions out. And if mimics over time spread worldwide and having millions of examples as they simply just grow out of plants, there really is no limit to how many there could be and therefore how many people they could kill. And in my opinion, that's what makes it realistically climb into the billions over time. Number 4, the alternates and Gabriel. Total possible death toll, 1.5 billion. The alternates and in turn Gabriel as a whole are particularly deadly because they essentially weaponize your mind against you. The Mandela Catalog Wiki and of course the series describes them as essentially replacing people that they have killed and then using their form in order to deceive new people into falling into the same trap. Alternates, as you guys are probably familiar with, look wrong in multiple different ways, including like distorted voices, unusually long limbs, stuff like that. And eventually you're going to see them replace more and more your loved ones, friends, and even just strangers you see walking down the street or in typical everyday encounters. And they are not new to this, as many people would think. This has been going back to biblical times, to the birth of Christ, and probably even earlier. So you can assume they're probably pretty experienced on what they're doing. And on top of this, Gabriel is theorized to literally be Satan himself, inserting himself as the savior of humanity back during the birth. This likely means alternates have been replacing humans and giving the original ones metaphysical awareness disorder, the 99.3 self-end rate illness that I was talking about earlier, which just requires a few seconds of whispering from an alternate and then you all of a sudden exhibit overwhelming self-ending urges. That horrible shit. The scariest detail is that this scales perfectly in any modern society. People rely constantly on voices, phone calls, videos, etc., and a lot of other things that alternates turn into a weapon. Even if they only push a small percentage of the world into taking their own life, total societal collapse finishes the job for everyone else. That's typically how you realistically approach the end of humanity without needing a single explosion. Number 3, the Horned Serpent. Alcatraz, total possible death toll, 4 billion. Now, the Monument Mythos is an odd series, but I say that in the best possible way, because it almost plays like history itself has been infected with something that none of us can really comprehend. And I can't pretend that I completely understand this series because of how vast it is, but I'm under the impression that the Horned Serpent is a cosmic entity that sort of bridges realities, and the special trees are kind of framed as extensions of it. Now, the reason I'm putting this in the billions is this isn't really just something that attacks you, but rather something that changes the rules of reality itself. The Horned Serpent alone is continental size, and as you could probably imagine, it could easily wipe out huge parts of the world. But despite this, in the series, the government does seem to have appeased it over time. But honestly, what happens when someone fucks up? Causing billions to die from direct events and billions more from the world breaking apart around them. I also want to give honorable mentions of entities like Alcatraz, who could easily replace the whole Western Hemisphere overnight, which theoretically means they're all dead, as all of their original cells become Alcatraz cells. On top of this, there's also technically the Nixon verse, which is kind of like a Monument Mythos spin-off, in which we see an entity known as the D-Day Knight effectively wipe out all life on Earth in seconds. So it's very possible that we see it total around half the entire world's population easily. The Iris is essentially a sort of cosmic invasion with a lot of planning. It is described as a malevolent, sentient, eye-like planet that appeared between Neptune and Pluto. And it's framed as a sort of cosmic demon that sends floods of entities to Earth, both to wipe out humanity and to mutate its core. The Iris also projects a deadly disease that could easily turn millions into masses of roots. This isn't just a random disaster, we're being specifically targeted. The Iris seems to be determined to terraform the Earth, or in layman's terms, turn everything we know and love to fucking roots. And before you're thinking of ways you'd survive, you have to consider that once you're dealing with a hostile intelligence at a planetary scale, running away stops meaning anything, and you can't really hide if the Earth itself falls out from beneath you. Although, best case scenario, a fraction survives in bunkers from just the disease and the woodcrawler part for a while, which, for context, woodcrawlers are basically like those mimics I was discussing on steroids, because they're silent, huge, and could dig underground, and along with having a sort of thermal vision just to see anything that emits heat. So you'd need some serious luck to survive these alone. But the direction this points to is simple. Earth gets turned into something else, and humanity becomes either consumed, replaced, or completely wiped out. 6 to 8 billion is the honest top end here. I would say at least 6 billion, but I could easily see it reaching 8. Number 1, the moon. Total possible death toll, 8.3 billion, also known as the entire population. Now, in a horrific way, this is actually one of the cleanest apocalypses on our list, as it's basically just something you can't avoid. It's not really one huge event that's obvious, rather than a silent killer that wipes out all of humanity. And I don't think people who watch the series really realize how much this could scale up. The Local 58 wiki in the series itself describes the moon becoming capable of harming, possessing, or killing those who view it with the naked eye. And that condition would be insane on Earth, because people look at the moon all the time without even thinking. Drivers glance up, kids point at it, people step outside for like 10 seconds. Even if warnings go out that aren't somehow fake government alerts that trick you, you're essentially fighting human nature, misinformation, and curiosity all at once. And as I've mentioned a few times before, once the last billion of humanity that hasn't already looked at the moon at least once figures out what's going on, panic will ensure and society will break down. You guys know what is going to happen at that point. And then the rest of humanity just slowly trickles out by slipping up and looking at the moon, or being forced to by various different sources. You can't really take out the moon, and if you somehow do, there would be bigger problems. I'm not completely sure how it would work, but if it is truly you look at the moon and then you die, the ceiling is literally everyone. The total extinction of about 8.3 billion people. Okay, that's going to be it for the video. I hope you all enjoyed this concept of the deadliest things in analog horror. I wanted to go ahead and do a throwback on the unfair analog horror video, and something similar but with also different at the same time. Let me know if you guys like this format and you want to see me do it with some of the other verses, and of course make sure to give the original creator some love. And remember, there is tons of other content on my channel, so if you guys are ever bored and need some horror content to watch, I have plenty for you guys to look through.